Can you also say if you can see the screen I have shared?
Not at Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Hare Krishna everyone.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Now we can see Prabhuji.
Okay. I think we are ready. I hope next time it gets faster. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कथा मह्यं ददति स्वपदान्तिकं वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलान् श्रीगुरुवैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सगणरघुनाथान्वितां तां सजीवं सहाद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणललित श्रीविशाख अन्वितांश्च नमो ॐ विष्णुपादाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिन् इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वतीदेवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादेशतारिणे वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Reading from Śrīla Prabhupāda-līlāmṛta Volume 1 Chapter 7. Jhansi, the League of Devotees. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, Bharti Bhavan, P.O. Jhansi, UP. Abhay Charan De. It was another 24 It's another 12-hour ride with dozens of stops. The train's rattling and clattering and its rocking from side to side made riding difficult. But Abhay, crowded on the wooden bench with other third-class passengers, kept writing. Within the dinghy compartment, passengers eyed one another complacently, and soot and dust blew in the open windows as the train sped along. Outside, past the monotonous embankment of loose stones, bright violet trumpet flowers bloomed on tall stalks in the shallow trackside ditches. Water buffalo and oxen grazed in the distance or sometimes pulled a plough before a solitary farmer. Abhay was going to Jhansi, not for business, but for preaching. 1 month before, in October of 1952, when Abhay had visited Jhansi on business, Mr. Dubey, a customer and the owner of a Jhansi hospital, had invited him to lecture at the Gita Mandir. Many Jhansi people appreciated things religious or humanitarian, whether from Vaishnavas, Theosophites, Mayavadis, politicians, or whatever. They regarded almost any path as dharma as long as it showed some edifying pity or tended towards the public welfare. Mr. Dubey had read with interest several issues of Back to Godhead and had therefore requested Abhay to speak. Abhay had been eager, and he had found keen interest among the audience of more than 100 people. many of them young medical students and graduates from the local Ayurvedic college. Abhay was 56, and his commanding presentation of Krishna consciousness had impressed the young, religious minded people of Jhansi. 25 years old Prabhakar Mishra, principal of the Vedanta Sanskrit College and head medical officer of Jhansi Ayurvedic University, saw that Abhay was very forceful in his desire to spread Krishna consciousness. Dr. Mishra regarded him as a kind of guru, although dressed in white. Here is a humble person, he thought, a real sadhu. Short and stocky Dr. Shastri, just beginning his career in Ayurvedic medicine, was an active young man fascinated by Abhay's purity and his vision of a world movement for distributing India culture. Older men like tall Sau Ramacharan, Haiharan Mitra, a utensils shopkeeper who wrote poetry and wore a white Nehru cap, also wanted to learn more about Lord Chaitanya from Abhay. Dr. Mulik, who was the Gita Mandir secretary, and Dr. Siddhi from the university, along with their wives, had sincerely approached Abhay after his talk and asked him please to visit Jhansi again. Abhay had come to them not as a pharmaceutical salesman or as a man with family concerns, but purely a devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Although the specific applications of Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati were new to his audience, these teachings had interested them, and the more Abhay had experienced these teachings and spoken of his ambitions for spreading Krishna's message, the more his hearers had encouraged him. Several of them had suggested he conduct his mission in Jhansi, and they had promised to help him. Dr. Shastri had even invited Abhay to come live with him. He would introduce Abhay to important citizens and arrange for lectures in various meeting places of Jhansi. After staying for 10 days, Abhay had returned to Allahabad, but remembering Jhansi, he had been unable to concentrate on his business. Something more important was on his mind, the need for an association of devotees propagating the teachings and the practices of Krishna consciousness worldwide. With the Gaudiya Math now broken into permanent schemes, his godbrothers conducting their own private ashrams in separate locales, apparently impervious to any reconciliations, something would happen to be done, would have to be done if the overwhelming atmosphere of godlessness were to be corrected. There must emerge, as Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati has envisioned, a league of preachers with activities worldwide. The nations of the world had sought unity through the League of Nations and recently through the United Nations. The League had failed, and so would the United Nations, unless it recognized the truth, spiritual unity, and equality of all living beings in terms of their intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abhay did not expect any good to come of such organizations. Though they wanted peace and unity, their attempts were simply another feature of godlessness. No, creating peace and unity was the duty of Vaishnava. So Abhay had been thinking that perhaps a likely place to start an organization of devotees would be Jhansi. It wasn't a major city, but at least he had found concerned people. The students had listened and accepted and had said they would help. Abhay had sensed a certain lack of sincerity and depth in their appreciation and a sentimentality that made him doubt their seriousness. But if he could find a few, or even one who was serious, then he would have a beginning. He wanted to preach. That was his mission. Besides, he was already getting older. If something were to begin, it should be now. So he would go to Jhansi again, to stay for an indefinite duration. Without much concern for his Allahabad affairs, Abhay left his palace and his farmhouse to conduct local business with his son and nephew, informing to in Pultan. Abhay saw Dr. Shastri waving energetically. They rode together by Tanga to Dr. Shastri's dispensary, and the talkative, effusive doctor promised many preaching opportunities and interviews. Dr. Shastri also spoke of Lore of Jhansi. The site of the present city had formerly been a part of the forest in which Lord Ramachandra had practiced austerities many thousands of years ago. had lived here during their exile, and since then many great Vedic sages had had their hermitages in the area. Jhansi had also been the home of an Indian heroine, Lakshmi Bai, who in the mid 19th century had taken part in starting the Indian independence movement against the British regime. Statues and pictures of Lakshmi Bai riding a horse and holding a sword in her upraised hand were displayed throughout the town. But Jhansi of 1952 was a crowded, poor city with dirt streets and minimal technological amenities. Dr. Shastri lived alone in a two-story rented building in Jhansi's Sipri Bazaar. On the first floor, he had his clinic, and upstairs, his one-room residence, which he had offered to share with Abhay. The young but influential doctor was a good person to introduce Abhay to receptive citizens of Jhansi, and he was eager to do so. Outgoing and energetic, he moved easily amongst the people of his town. He was respectful towards Abhay, who was twice his age and whom he appreciated as being firmly fixed in the Vaishnava philosophy and way of life. Dr. Shastri saw it as his duty to help Abhay, and he gladly introduced Abhay to others and arranged for lectures. Abhay and Dr. Shastri would cook and eat together like family members. Abhay revealed his idea for a League of Devotees, an organization with worldwide scope but based in Jhansi. The citizens of Jhansi, he said, should all take part in helping spread Lord Krishna's mission. Lord Chaitanya had said that Indians have a special responsibility to distribute God consciousness both in India and around the world. Dr. Shastri. In his heart, always it was burning that the whole world was suffering in the materialistic view. Everyone is busy in eat, drink, and be merry. So the whole day he was touring and preaching his mission that was prescribed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj. He was having iron will, determination, and self confidence about his mission. He was not doubtful at all. He was Dhrida Vrata, staunchly determined. Actually, he was always preaching Hare Nama eva kevalam kalau nasti eva gatir anyatha. No other way except Hare Krishna Nama. So always discussing. Sometimes the whole night he was discussing with me, and sometimes fed up. Uh, I was fed up. I was requesting, please don't disturb me. Please let me sleep. And he, the old man missionary worker, he was just like a young man. I was a young chap, and he was just like my friend, my elder brother. He was like my guide and teacher because the preacher is a friend, philosopher, and guide. He was always trying to create a good atmosphere through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. The whole Bhagavad Gita was his practical life. His mission was not a mission of preaching only, but of practical action. He was also trying to catch me for this mission, and I would try to slip away. I did not think that he would do any miracle for spiritual revolution of the world, although that is what he urged us. While Dr. Shastri tended his clinic, Abhay sat and spoke with patients, occasionally recommending medicines but mostly preaching. For now, he was content to live and preach in Jhansi. Here was life, people receptive to his preaching, who responded to his urging them to chant Hare Krishna. His desire and determination to leave everything else behind and preach day and night depending on Krishna for result were increasing. He began regularly lecturing and chanting at various programs in the city, sometimes at several in one day. On Sundays, he would lecture at the Sadhana Mandir, another day at Gita Mandir, another day at Theosophical Society, and regularly in people's homes. Mr. Ram Mitra, the shopkeeper poet, maintained a Shiva temple near his home, and Abhay began to perform kirtan and lecture there. Sometimes Abhay would visit Mr. Mitra and friends about Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Abhay would attend. Sometimes Abhay would visit Mr. Mitra at his utensil shops. The shop was in a crowded Jhansi bazaar and opened onto the busy street. Abhay would sit down like an ordinary customer amidst stacks of stainless steel, buckets, plates, bowls, and lotas, and speak to Mr. Mitra and friends about Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or sometimes he would listen to Mr. Mitra tell about his published book of poetry and his literary reputation. Mr. Mitra saw that Abhay's ambition was no less than to make the whole city of Jhansi alive with Krishna consciousness. Abhay quoted Chaitanya Charitamrita: "One who has received the great fortune of taking birth in India should make his life perfect and then do good for others by spreading Krishna consciousness." And Abhay would add, "The whole world is waiting, Mr. Mitra, for our spiritual revolution." Mr. Mitra would nod, his handsome Nehru like face forming a smile, but he saw that Abhay wanted people to do more than merely listen to him. He wanted them to do something. Once Mr. Mitra offered Abhay a copy of his book, showing him the foreword by a famous man, and repeatedly mentioned that the great sadhu Vinoba Bhave had liked the poems very much. When Mr. Mitra learned that Abhay was especially good milk, Abhay invited Mr. Mitra to accompany him on foot to nearby villages along with a kirtan party for preaching. But Mr. Mitra declined, being unable to get anyone to tend the shop for him. Another young Ayurvedic doctor was Dr. Siddhi, who immediately expressed interest in Abhay's enthusiastic plans for the spreading Krishna consciousness. Dr. Siddhi said, "He came several times to my place. I am I have got a kirtan room on my roof, and he performed kirtan there as well as at Gita Mandir. We were all going daily to Theosophical Society. There was an atmosphere, a very pious, sacred, and calm atmosphere when the kirtan preaching and lectures were performed. He used to play harmonium. We accompanied him for meeting people and preaching his mission. The main thing was to perform kirtana and give a lecture on Bhagavad Gita and the life of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was his Lord, and I also loved him. Radhelal Mullik, secretary of Gita Mandir and Sadhana Mandir, began meeting often with Abhay. Radhelal Mullik: "I am very much influenced by him. I used to spend 3 or 4 hours every morning in his association. Mahaprabhu. He was also writing at that time. The president of Gita Mandir and I both volunteered to cook for him. It was during a morning walk, Mr. Radhelal Mullik, that Abhay first spotted the Bharati Bhavan, a picturesque temple complex across from the large Antiya pond. The neighborhood known as Antiyatal was quiet and sparsely populated, but it was near Shipri Road, the main thoroughfare between downtown Jhansi and Sipri Bazaar. Abhay inquired from Mr. Mullik about the temple, and together they turned from the main road and walked down a sloping footpath that led through the main gates of the compound. There they found several secluded acres nestled within a grove of neem and mango trees. The main structure was Radha Memorial. It was a small like a chapel, but its proportions were stout and bold, sitting to a stone dome on top. Two elephants, two elephants bearing the goddess of fortune Lakshmi on their upraised trunks decorated the entrance. Concrete bunting and striped patterns of red, green, and blue added to the decorative yet massive effect. The entrance was marked with words Radha Smarak carved in Hindi scripture, and above it the English translation Radha Memorial. When Abhay saw the Sanskrit inscription across the side of the stone temple, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, he turned to Radhe Mullik and said strongly, "The Lord has built this building for my use." From that moment, Abhay was determined to have the building. Mr. Mullik explained that the temple had been built in 1939 as a memorial to the wealthy Vaishnava landlord Radhabhai, but at the present was not in use. Dr. Prabhakar Mishra, whom Abhay had already met on several occasions, had converted. Mr. Mullik and Abhay sought Dr. Mishra in his quarters in the main building, and when Dr. Mishra saw Abhay's enthusiasm, he invited Abhay to stay there with him. Dr. Mishra confirmed that except for his Sunday morning Gita class, the facility was sitting idle and he welcomed Abhay to carry on his writing and preaching there. Abhay liked the idea. Immediately he began thinking of uses of the buildings, surveying the land with increasing interest. A second, larger building, also with stone pillars and facades, held a hall and 5 rooms. Abhay made mental plans for each room. In this room, kirtan and lectures with large gatherings. In this room, the deity of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In these rooms, residents, brahmacharis and sannyasis, guides, guests here, an office here, the printing press here. There was even land for grazing a cow. It was a self-contained unit. Hundreds of people could come here for kirtans, prasadam and discourses. Preachers could go out from here distributing back to government magazines. Some could even go abroad with Lord Chaitanya's message. As Abhay and his companions walked through the compound, appreciating it as suitable place to start an ashram, his companions encouraged him, saying they were sure that Mr. Reva Shankar Bhai the agent who handled all the properties of Radha Bhai's descendants, would have no objection to Abhay's living there. Why couldn't the landlord give him the building? Abhay asked. They were simply going to waste. If it were actually to be a memorial of Radha, it should be used in Krishna's service, since Krishna is Radha's worshipable lord. Abhay was determined, and his friends agreed to help him. First, they met with Ramitra, who said that he was such a close friend of Mr. Bayal's that Mr. Bayal would probably give the place simply at his request. Dr. Shastri said that he also wanted to go to impress upon Mr. Bayal how much the people of Jhansi wanted Abhay to have this place. When Reva Shankar Bayal met with his friend Ram Mitra, also presented were Abhay, Mr. Shastri, Radhelal Mullik, Prabhakar Mishra, and Suryamukh Sharma, a young educated Jhansi woman. They presented the case from several angles, and Mr. Bayal listened. He agreed that he wasn't using the place at present, and at this seemed to be a good cause. He agreed to let Abhay use the facilities for his League of Devotees for as long as he liked, and at Abhay's request, he agreed to become a member of the League. They shook hands. On behalf of the estate, Mr. Bayal presented the Bharati Bhavan properties in charity to Abhay Charande and the League of Devotees. During December and January, Abhay prepared a League of Devotees charter. He wanted to begin vigorous, extensive preaching, following the example of his spiritual master. Once he began to set his goals to paper, the project immediately began to expand. Beyond Jhansi, beyond India, of course, the League of Devotees was for the young people of Jhansi. They were already expressing great interest. But Abhay's charter described more than merely evening classes and kirtan. It was a board scheme including a description of 4 orders of society Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and detailed plans to accommodate a worldwide religious movement. The charter set forth a probationary period for prospective members. It described spiritual initiation. It arranged for economic reciprocation between individual members and the League. It arranged to provide lodgings for preachers and it defined prohibited activities, illegitimate connection with women, intoxicating habit, diets other than regulated strictly on vegetable kingdom, gambling, and unnecessary sporting or recreation enterprises. To establish his league with the registrar in Lucknow, Abhay required a memorandum of association signed by league members. In this document, which was to list the objectives of the society, Abhay expressed his vision for continuation of spiritual master's mission. Like his god brothers, who had created new mutts after dissolution of Gaudiya Mutt, Abhay was forming a new branch of Gaudiya Sampradaya to be called the League of Devotees. He was not simply claiming proprietorship of a few buildings. He was establishing a Krishna conscious society that would expand into a world movement. His intentions were clearly not insular but were directed towards creating centers for spiritual development all over the world. Abhay wrote, Lord Chaitanya revealed the transcendental process of approaching the absolute Godhead. and in his teachings nothing appears to be absurd from the point of human reasoning, and nothing against any religion as accepted by the human and civilized world. In enumerating the League's goals, he included the opening of centers in all parts of the world, thus establishing the League as an international organization for spiritual development through education, culture, as also by recruiting members from all nations, creeds, and castes. The League would publish literature in many languages and print a monthly magazine, Back to Godhead. Abhay obtained the necessary signatures from his memorandum of association. He then took the train to Lucknow and on Feb 4th paid the deposit of 50 rupees and filled his application. He returned to Jhansi. In his room in Radha Memorial, Abhay would rise daily at 4 a.m. and arouse his young brother Prabhakar Mishra. From 4 to 5, Abhay would write. At 5, he would walk in Antiya Tal area at 5:30 bath and then chant Hare Krishna on his beats until 7, when he would hold a class on Chaitanya Charitamrita or Srimad Bhagavatam, although Prabhakar Mishra was usually the only listener. At 8, he would return to his literary work, typing until after 10, when he would begin to prepare a meal. In the afternoon, he would often go around Jhansi, meeting people and preaching, looking for anyone willing to take part in the League of Devotees. In the early evening, he would write until 7. When he would prepare for the kirtan and lecture, he would hold at one of various places in the city, depending on where he was invited. Although Abhay had no money for continuing back to Godhead, a well established part of his preaching was to write essays regardless of whether they were to be immediately published or not. He wrote a long essay, some 24,000 words, entitled Message of Godhead. He also wrote a series of chapters propounding the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, especially as they apply to the world problems and signs of devotion, a summary study of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. On May 16, 1953, Abhay held a grand opening celebration for the League of Devotees, with continuous readings, kirtan and prasadam distribution from early morning until night. The buildings were decorated with leaves, flowers, and many earthen water pots. In the evening, when attendance was the greatest, Abhay lectured from the ninth chapter of Bhagavad Gita on Raja Guhya Yoga. Prabhakar Mishra conducted a fire sacrifice, and several Brahmanas chanted mantra from Brahma Samhita. Guests received a 16-page prospectus containing Abhay's essay on the need for the league and an excerpt from the charter explaining its goals. It was signed Om Tat Sat, Abhay Charanara Vindo Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary. The opening was a pleasant, auspicious event for the people of Jhansi, and hundreds gathered in the evening for Abhay's lecture. Dr. Sharma, a charter member of League and editor of Jhansi daily newspaper, had already publicized the event and was planning a write-up for the following day. The Gaudiya Patrika also reported on the opening. The editor of local Theosophical Society, Sri Lakshmi Narayan Rajpali, was also present. Although he holds different philosophical opinions from Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, he is very sympathetic with this movement. In the assembly, there were many people worth mentioning. The inauguration and establishing of deities will be done soon. The assembly will request Rajpati Mr. K. M. Munshi to perform the inauguration ceremony. Their center has been registered by the Society Registration Act. Sri Bharati Bhavan is the name of the League's building, in which they have a lecture hall and a temple that resembles a palace. The assembly has many activities at the center, and there are also facilities for members to live there. Abhay felt confident that the Bharati Bhavan would now be established and recognized as a home of League of Devotees. He was happy to see that the opening day was not merely his private affair but an event celebrated by the most important citizens of Jhansi. His past life was seeming further and further behind him each day. But one day after he he had been in Jhansi about 6 months, a telegram arrived, bringing a startling reminder of his past connections. His business in Allahabad had been burglarized. His servants had stolen all his money and medicine and anything else of value. He had been a loss of 7,000 rupees. Abhay read the news, laughed and uttered the Bhagavatam verse. यस्याहम् अनुगृह्णामि हरिष्येत धनं शनैः ततो धनं त्यजन्ति अस्या स्वजन दुःखदुःखितम्. Prabhakar Mishra advised Abhay to go back to Allahabad to recover what he could. Now, Abhay said, this is good for me. I was sad, but now one great attachment has come to an end, and my life is fully surrendered and dedicated to Sri Sri Radha Madhava. Abhay's son Vrindavan soon arrived in Jhansi, requesting Abhay to come to Calcutta to revive the business. Abhay, Chirande and sons. As they sat together in Abhay's room at Memorial, Abhay explained that he could not go back. He requested Vrindavan to stay and assist him by doing typewriting, but Vrindavan returned to Calcutta. From his first meeting with Prabhakar Mishra, Abhay had urged the younger, educated man to take part in the League of Devotees as a full-time assistant. Although as lecturer and medical officer, Prabhakar had many duties at the university, he helped as much as he felt he could. He soon became Abhay's most active assistant. Abhay appointed him secretary to the league and after several months initiated him. Thus Abhay became Prabhakar's spiritual master and Prabhakar became Abhay's first disciple. As a preacher, Abhay was duty bound to accept disciples, giving them the Hare Krishna mantra and the Parampara instructions as he had received them from his spiritual master. Prabhakar, however, not being a completely surrendered disciple, remained independent, more like an assistant than a disciple. As university principal, Sanskrit scholar, and medical doctor, he continued to pursue his own interests also. Srila Prabhupada said, that league of devotees, I was alone. There were some devotees, but they were not so active. I was doing everything. I wanted to organize with Prabhakar Mishra and others, but they were not interested to devote their whole life. If you asked him to do full time work, that he'd not do. But he was initiated. They were all learned scholars in Sanskrit, medical men. Thus, when the Gaudiya Patrika had reported the opening day ceremonies, it had referred to Prabhakar in honorable terms as Abhay's partner in the League of Devotees, although he was actually Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's initiated disciple. Bhaktivedanta Prabhu summoned the service of the Honorable Acharya Srimad Prabhakar Mishra Shastri, Kavya, poetry, Vyak Vyakarana, grammar, Vedanta, philosophy, Tirtha, BIS, MSA to perform the sacrifice. He is the principal of a college in which the Vedas and Vedangas are taught and degrees are given. He is also the assistant manager of the League of Devotees. According to the time and circumstances, Abhay was engaging this young man in devotional service. Abhay was interested not in collecting disciples, but in establishing the League of Devotees, and for that he needed assistance. Prabhakar Mishra. When I first met Swamiji, he said to me, you are a Brahmana and a Prabhakar, and you are eating in a restaurant? You come with me. I will feed you myself and I shall cook. So we would prepare prasadam and offering it to the Lord, we would take Bhagavat Prasad together. In this way, by His mercy, I got the chance to take prasadam. He also said to me, you become Keshahin, shaven. So I went with shaven head to the college where I taught and everyone laughed at me. When I told Swamiji the situation, he said, since you are in a medical officer, you can grow out your hair. When I took Diksha, Swamiji gave me my name, Acharya Prabhakar. My original name was Prabhakar Mishra. So he said, you don't write the Mishra, you are Acharya Prabhakar. He gave me the name and offered me a tulsi mala and put tilak on my forehead and tied a kanthi mala around my neck. He had registered the foundation of the League of Devotees and he appointed me as its secretary for preaching throughout the world. We used to go to the villages for Sankirtan and Bhagavad Gita Katha continuously. Abhay started a Sankirtan movement in Jhansi. At first accompanied only by Acharya Prabhakar, he used to walk about the neighborhood of Naibhasti chanting Hare Krishna. As he continued this practice, his group gradually increased until 50 people were gathering regularly to go out on parikram, chant together, and visit temples. Afterwards, they would gather at Radha Memorial for an evening lecture. When Abhay would go to preach in the nearby villages, he would usually be accompanied by whatever league members were free. Once he went with Acharya Prabhakar on Padayatra, traveling on foot and preaching, to Chirgaon, some 20 miles from Jhansi. In Chirgaon, there lived a nationally known poet, Maithili Saran Gupta, who received Abhay and his disciple at his home for dinner. Abhay told his host that since he was an accomplished poet, he should write something glorifying Krishna, and the poet agreed. After preaching in Chirgaon, Abhay and Prabhakar returned to Jhansi, spending one day in each of 5 villages along the way. At night, the villagers would gather and Abhay would lead Kirtan. He explained to Prabhakar that although most of the simple farmers were not scholars in Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, they could achieve the highest spiritual benefit simply by Kirtan. Abhay was well received by the villagers who begged him to return soon, but to give them notice next time so that they could prepare a proper reception. While preaching locally, Abhay was simultaneously working to give an international scope to his League of Devotees. He wrote to government agencies asking them to help him expand his genuine educational project, and he also tried to recruit preachers from amongst his friends. He wrote to his old college classmate Rupen Mitra in Calcutta, inviting him to join the worldwide missionary activities. My mission desires to train up to 40 trainees, and I have asked help from the government for this useful and educational purpose. I want that you may be one of the trainees in this regard, and you can ask Kartik Dada to join us in this spirit. You will know from the papers sent to you how we live and what we do, and thus you can make up your mind whether it is possible for you to join us. The first thing is that we want to train up some retired men in the Vanaprastha life and some young men in the Brahmachari life. I have no inclination for the sannyas life, which is rather a difficult job for the fallen people of this age. The so-called sannyasis in red garments have spoiled the good name of such order of life. Abhay also asked Rupen, kindly let me know the charges of this advertisement in English and vernacular papers of Calcutta. Educational. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply. A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, Bharti Bhavan. Excuse me. P.O. Jhansi, UP. Abhay wanted a deed stating that the Bharti Bhavan belonged to the Leagues of Devotees. So far, he had only a promise. Thinking of Jhansi as a permanent headquarters, he wanted a written commitment. When he approached Reva Shankar Bhayal for a deed of gift, Mr. Bhayal gave Mr. Bhayal gave Abhay a form requesting him to pay 500 rupees to register the building. But since Abhay had just suffered a loss of 7,000 rupees in Allahabad and had recently spent 3,000 rupees in his preaching, much of it's going towards the opening day festival. He found himself unable to raise even 500 rupees. Acharya Prabhakar, despite his academic position, had very little money and was being subsidized by his parents with 3 rupees a day. Most of Abhai's congregation, especially the students, were in a similar position. Dr. Bahal's request for 500 rupees didn't seem urgent, nor did he say what would happen if Abhay couldn't pay. But he soon made another request. Mr. Abhay Charandesh should buy the Bharti Bhavan for 5,000 rupees. It was disconcerting. The generous gift had turned into a purchase offer. The people in town were already referring to the property as Abhay Bhaktivedanta's ashram, and the League of Devotees was printed in large letters across the wall of the compound. When pressed by Abhay's friend, Mr. Bhayal assured them that Abhay could go on living there, but ultimately he would have to buy. Mr. Bhayal said he would give the League of Devotees first consideration and a good price. Abhay worried if the League could purchase the property that would be best, but he had been unable to raise even 500 rupees. 5,000 seemed impossible. Abhay found no strong financial backing from his congregation. His league did not include even a single full-time worker. He did not know if one way to raise the money. He did know of one way to raise money. His pharmaceutical business. He still had a small operation being run by his son in Calcutta. Abhay had formerly been earning 3,000 rupees a month. He considered approaching God Brothers for help, but the prospects for earning the money himself seemed more likely. For 30 years, he had earned more money by his pharmaceutical business, and he could do it again for the most worthy cause. When he arrived in Calcutta in spring 1954, he was without money. He chose to live with his godbrothers at Gaudiya Sangha in Chetla, the same neighborhood his family lived in. Since he had no money, the head of ashram bore his expenses. Abhay gave daily discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam, which the Gaudiya Sangha brahmacharis highly appreciated. Krishna Kumara Brahmachari. Even after he left, his sweet, melodious voice would ring in my ears. He used to often express a desire to go abroad and preach. One of his sons was running a small business, Vimalton Laboratory, and thus supporting the family. Abhay knew that his wife would not be interested in his work in Jhansi. His son had been there but had not been impressed. The family would see his preaching in Jhansi as a threat to their home life. Abhay, however, was sustaining himself by his vision, which was now taking practical shape, of a world reformed by Krishna consciousness. He even thought of opening a branch of League of Devotees in Calcutta, but inevitably he was plunged again into family responsibilities. Some of his children were still unmarried, rent and bills had to be paid. Even if he were to develop the Vimalton laboratory, the family would demand whatever he earned, and even if he were to accede to their demands, live at home, and give up preaching, the greatest difficulty would still remain. They weren't serious about devotional service, nor could he change them. What was the use of conducting a business if they would not be devotees? He visited his family, and the same old scene occurred. Local friends came to visit, and Abhay began preaching, giving Bhagavad Gita classes, just as he had been doing in Jhansi. Meanwhile, his wife and the rest of the family would take tea in a separate room. Srila Prabhupada said, I wanted as much as possible to get her to work with me in spreading Krishna consciousness to get her help. But she was very determined. She wouldn't help me in spreading Krishna consciousness. So finally, after many years, I could understand she wouldn't be any assistance to me. She was very attached to drinking tea. I was always telling her not to drink tea because I wanted to have a nice Vaishnava family. So although I was repeatedly telling her, this time I finally said, you have to choose between me or tea. Either the tea goes or I go. In this way, I was even criticizing my own family, but because they were thinking I was the husband or father, they couldn't take my instruction seriously. So she replied, give up tea drinking or give up my husband? Well, I will have to give up my husband. Then, of course, she thought I was joking. One day, Radharani made a great mistake. There was a system of barter in which a customer would place on a scale an object of shopkeeper considered valuable, and the shopkeeper would then balance it with the equal weight of merchandise. So while Abhay was out, his wife took his worshipable Bhagavatam to the market and traded it with tea biscuits. When Abhay came home and looked for the book, she told him what had happened. She hadn't taken the matter as a very serious thing. She was out of tea biscuits, but Abhay was shocked. At first he felt depressed, but then a wave of absolute resolution passed over him. His family life was finished. When he told them he was leaving, they didn't understand what he meant. He had been living for 30 years. He was always coming and going. When he walked out the door, they thought, there he goes again. He's leaving. It was the usual routine. Everyone could see, even the neighbors. Mr. Day was going again. He had been at home, now he was going. He would be back again. But Abhay knew he would never come back. Srila Prabhupada. Before leaving, both of them disagreed. But then the time is up. Never mind whether they are married or not. Let them see to their own business. Suppose I die immediately, who will take care of my daughter? At that time we say, God will take care. Then why not now? God will take care. My Guru Maharaj used to say that renunciation of family life was civil suicide. If you commit suicide, that is criminal. But that renunciation of family is voluntarily committing suicide. Now I am dead. Whatever you like, you do. Krishna says, Sarva dharman parignacha, give up all religion. So family is grih dharma, the religion of the family. But Krishna says, give that up. But that attachment is there. And if we say that feeling of attachment has to be given up gradually, then that we cannot do because the attachment is there. But if God will take care of them, if I die immediately, then why not now? His spiritual emotions were so turbulent that he wasn't thinking of going to Jhansi. He wanted to take a train to anywhere. Then he remembered some old God brother friends who were living in an ashram in Jhargram, only a short train ride south of Calcutta. So he borrowed 10 rupees from a friend and bought a ticket to Jhargram. It was a small mutt. When Abhay arrived, he was welcomed by Paramahamsa Maharaj, Damodar Maharaj, and others. Paramahamsa Maharaj had been present even when Abhay had first met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he remembered Abhay as he had looked then, dressed in white khadi, looking like a Gandhian anarchist. Abhay explained to him, I couldn't fulfill my family's needs, so now let me preach the message of Lord Chaitanya. Abhay told him how his business had failed and how he had willingly left his family and was now destitute. Paramahamsa Maharaj. When Abhay arrived, he appeared very poor, starving. He had no means. He came alone to the mutt, and when he arrived, he only chanted Hare Krishna, nothing else. Abhay spent his money in Jhargram chanting the holy name and becoming settled in detachment from his family. For several days he chanted japa almost continuously. Paramahamsa Maharaj would lecture in the evenings and then Abhay would also speak on Bhagavad Gita. But as time passed, his thoughts turned again to Jhansi and he soon felt ready to go back to the League of Devotees. He had to secure the buildings and go on with the preaching. But before returning, he obtained a large deity of Lord Chaitanya that he planned to install at the Bharti Bhavan. Ironically, he had gone to Calcutta to do business and raise money, but now he had no money, no business, and no family responsibilities. He had been married 36 years and now at 58 he had fully taken the order. Now Abhay did not adopt the saffron dress of Vanaprastha but continued wearing a white dhoti and kurta. The people of Jhansi had always known him as a preacher with no family ever since he had first arrived a year and a half before. Now he was returning to them with a deity of Lord Chaitanya and a determination to establish Lord Chaitanya's temple in Jhansi. Abhay met with a warm welcome from Acharya Prabhakar and others, but he also met with competition for possession of Radha Memorial. It began with a Sanskrit conference, the Bandelkhand Sanskrit Sammelan, which brought to Jhansi the governor of province K.M. Munshi and his wife Leelavati. An active social organizer, Leelavati Munshi had opened several branches of Mahila Samiti Sangh, a society that aimed at socially uplifting women by teaching them secretarial skills and English. Two educated Jhansi ladies, Chandramukhi and Suryamukhi, wanted such a women's social program for Jhansi, and they took the opportunity to approach Leelavati Munshi during her visit. She inspired them, and they began to talk about where in Jhansi they could open a building. One of the ladies, the Bharti Bhavan, could be used. Although Suryamukhi Sharma had been one of the sympathizers was first approached, who had first approached Mr. Bayal on behalf of Abhay Charan De and had asked that he be given the Bharati Bhavan for his League of Devotees, she felt that the lady's cause was more important, and she knew that Abhay's ownership of building was not settled. The women agreed that the building would be an excellent facility for Mahila Samiti Sangh branch and that their cause was more urgent than Abhay's. Suryamukhi, assured of support by governor's wife, called on A.C. Bhaktivedanta. She explained that his league of worldwide Vaishnavas would never take shape. He was a nice person and she liked him, but she didn't think he could realize his extraordinary expectations. She suggested he vacate the Bharati Bhavan so that the governor's wife could organize a women's social center. You can go here and there for the sake of building a temple, she told him. You are free to travel anywhere, but these poor women in Jhansi have nothing, so they must be given these buildings for their use. She found him adamantly opposed. No, Abhay said. Find another building. Abhay argued that his work was not just for a section of people but for all living beings. Suryamukhi left frustrated. Abhay was surprised that a member of League of Devotees was now working against him, and the maneuver was being backed by governor's wife. Mrs. Munshi could work at a much more influential level without having to confront Abhay directly and without his even knowing what she was doing. After she talked with Mr. Bayal, word got around that Mr. Bayal had been pressured to persuade Abhay Charan to relinquish his claim on Bharati Bhavan. Mr. Bayal owned a cinema house in Jhansi, and there was talk that he could have a lot of difficulty with his operator's license unless Abhay Charan vacated Radha Memorial. In 1954, Mrs. Munshi wrote Abhay in reference to his failure to raise the 5000 rupees. Dear Bhaktivedanta ji, she wrote, you wanted to organize there, but you could not. But I have got this institution Mahila Samiti. Why not give it to me? Abhay was of a mind to resist. He had lawyer friends who advised him that even though he was opposed by governor's family, he had a good case that would stand up well in the court. India's tradition of respect for religious buildings was on his side. Abhay replied to Mrs. Munshi, introducing himself as the founder of the League of Devotees. He explained the goal of the League, enclosed a copy of his prospectus, and presented many statements by prominent people. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Sri Sitaram, Raja Mahendra Pratap, and even her husband, Sri K. Munshi, praising the wonderful work of the League of Devotees. He also mentioned that the president of League had recently received a 100 rupee donation in Mathura from His Excellency the Governor, Mr. Munshi himself. Abhay said that although work had been going on slowly but peacefully in Jhansi, his mind had now been bothered by Mrs. Munshi's negotiations. He requested her not to pressure anyone about his occupying the Bharti Bhavan, though he admitted, if you or any one of your agents do try, the pressure will be more weightful. I am a non-entity in that comparison. Abhay hoped that by his presenting the details of his league, she would understand that his was a better case than the Mahila Samiti. He quoted the first three verses of the fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, wherein Lord Krishna describes how the ancient science of Bhakti Yoga is received through parampara, the order of succession from one teacher to the next, and how kings are responsible for seeing that Krishna consciousness spreads for everyone's benefit. He also argued that since, according to Bhagavad Gita, only a few amongst thousands and thousands of men endeavor for self realization, and since the League of Devotees engaged its members in self realization, he was providing an important and rare service. He offered to meet with Mrs. Munshi along with some 15 sannyasis from the area and suggested that she work cooperatively with them and understand the importance of the League. The League of Devotees was benefiting all classes. As Sri Krishna had said in Bhagavad Gita, even one of a low birth can attain the shelter of the Supreme Lord. But the Mahila Samiti, Abhay pointed out, was based on bodily conceptions of caste, creed, color, and sex. Therefore, it could not be as important a cause. Abhay closed by requesting Mrs. Munshi not to try to occupy the Radha Memorial, which was already being used for a noble and well appreciated cause. He signed A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary, League of Devotees. Aware that he was involved in an intrigue, Abhay organized his thoughts and set down on a paper a short history outlining important events surrounding his possession of the Bharati Bhavan in October 1952. I delivered some lectures at Gita Mandir on Gandhi Jayanti Day 1952, made acquaintance with Prabhakar Shastri. My idea of League of Devotees implemented. He took me to Reva Shankar for Bharati Bhavan. Shri Reva Shankar agreed to hand over the Bharati Bhavan to League of Devotees and he agreed to become a member of it in the presence of Prabhakar Mitraji and myself. I write letters from Allahabad to confirm. He confirmed my letter on 10-12-52. Prabhakar intimated the desire of Reva Shankar on 11-53. I got the document needed for League of Devotees and came to Jhansi for signature of the members. Reva Shankar signed and agreed to become an executive member. The document was submitted for registration on 4-2-53 at Lucknow, returned on 10-10-53. The League of Devotees ceremoniously started 16-5-53 and work began. So I am occupying the building since then and continuing my work. Abhay went on to enumerate more than 30 points, including news, publicity, and congratulations he had received. He listed the story of how he came here sacrificing uh, sacrificing my business and family. I received a telegram from Allahabad instructing the news of burglary by breaking lock. I could not attend the business for work here and it was closed subsequently at a loss of rupees 7,000. Abhay thought of turning to some of his sannyasi godbrothers for help. If he or they could purchase the buildings, his competitors would be silenced. He thought it worthwhile to interest his godbrothers in purchasing the building as an adjunct to their own missions. Vrindavan was not far away, a 4 hour train ride to Mathura and then a short Tanga ride. He had gone there on pilgrimage in October of 1953 and had even looked at an available room in temple near Keshi Ghat with the idea of staying there someday. He had also traveled several other times since he had begun residing in Jhansi. This time he went to Imlit and asked if he would like to take over the proprietorship of Bharati Bhavan so that it might be used for preaching Krishna consciousness according to the teachings of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. But Bhakti Saranga Goswami was not interested. After approaching another godbrother, Damodar Maharaj, who was also not interested in Jhansi, Abhay took the short Tanga ride back to Mathura to see another godbrother, Keshava Maharaj. Keshava Maharaj was in Mathura with a group of his disciples to establish a center, but he had not yet located a suitable place. So when Abhay told him about the building in Jhansi, he was interested. Abhay and Keshav Maharaj composed letter to Mr. Bhayal presenting their request and the aims of their movement and then travelled to Jhansi in a group. Abhay and Keshav Maharaj with his disciples. Keshav Maharaj and his party stayed for several days in Jhansi holding kirtans and lectures. They had an appointment with Reva Shankar Bhayal, but Mr. Bhayal broke it, so they had to wait to see him on another day. Meanwhile, Keshav Maharaj had time to form an opinion of Jhansi and discuss with Abhay the likelihood of making this his headquarters. He noted that the people were receptive, but the location was too remote. Even before meeting Mr. Bhayal, Keshav Maharaj felt reluctant to stake his whole mission in Jhansi. Abhay agreed, aware that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had said that a preacher should go into the big cities and not practice his bhajan in seclusion, and he admitted that after 2 years in Jhansi, he had made no full-time followers. When they finally met Mr. Bhayal failed to present clear terms for purchasing the property. He said they were eligible to buy it, but he made their use of building conditional. He wanted to have a say in the nature of programs they would hold. Abhay knew that this was just a further sign of shady dealings, and he suspected that Mr. Bhayal was under mounting pressure to give the buildings over to Mahila Samiti. Keshav Maharaj, having lost all interest, decided to go back to Mathura and he invited Abhay to join him. But Abhay remained. Mr. Bhayal wanted him out, and he even returned Abhay's deposit of 10 rupees, claiming that Abhay now had no justification for residing at Bharati Bhavan. Abhay noted down the latest events in his short history. He has also given me a check of rupees 210 in lieu of my deposit money with him, but he has no money in the bank. The bank has returned it with remark. The money which was given to him was misappropriated by him for his own purchase, and now he has given a false check with an agreement with the bank. It is plain cheating to me from the beginning to end. I must be compensated for all the money before I can leave the buildings. But he saw it as the inscrutable will of Krishna. Events and opinions were turning him against conducting a mission in Jhansi. It no longer seemed auspicious. Srila Prabhupada, I wanted to start from there. It was a nice big house. It was not given to me rightly, but I was using. So, somehow or other, she got imagination that this house is very nice. She was the governor's wife. Through collector and through government officials, she made the pressure. So, of course, there were many lawyers' friends. They advised me, you do not give up. But I thought, who's going to litigate? I thought that I have left my home and now should I take my litigation? No, I don't want this house. Abhay remembered how the Gaudiya Math preachers had expended their energy for years in the courts. Having terminated his long entanglement with family and business, he had no taste for a legal fight. He could have fought, but he remembered what Keshav Maharaj had said about Jhansi's being out of the way. Of course, the whole thing had just sprung up here. Otherwise, Abhay would never had chosen to establish his worldwide league in such an obscure place. The educated young men and women wished him well, just as they had good wishes for the Ladies' League, the Theosophy Society, the Arya Samaj, and many other causes. But their good intentions were certainly short of pure surrender and devotion. Even his own disciple could offer him only part time help. But these considerations had not been sufficient to force him out. The real thing was that he was being driven out. Srila Prabhupada said, if I did not leave, nobody would trust me. That was a fact. But I thought, who is going to litigate these things? It is the governor's wife and she is pressing through collector. The manager who is in charge, he had some cinema house. So they had to renew the license. And the collector pressed him that unless you arrange for his house, we are not going to renew your license. I thought unnecessarily this man will be in trouble. I will have to pay many rupees and she is going to be angry. But I thought, who is going to litigate these things? It is the governor's wife and she is pressing through collector. The manager who is in charge, he had come, he had some cinema house. So they had to renew the license. And the collector pressed him that unless you arrange for his house, we are not going to renew your license. I thought unnecessarily this man will be in trouble. I will have to pay many rupees. He decided he would continue. He would write letters to them. Acharya Prabhakar, Radhelal Mullik, Mr. Mitra, Dr. Shastri, and he gave them instructions on what they should do, especially the collector. He told them that they should not make any fuss about the house. They should not make any fuss. Acharya Prabhakar, Abhay told him even if they didn't make Jhansi their main residence. Yet it was obvious that this chapter of making ambitious plans for a world movement, going from house to house and village to village, performing Sankirtan, lecturing on Gita, distributing prasadam, this was ended. And it was not likely that he would return or that the residents of Jhansi could expect to see him again. When Abhay saw the thai lettering League of Devotees painted across the outside wall, he felt sad. It had been a natural, spontaneous success for him. For the intrigue, he would never have left. But he felt that he had no real choice. He had come as a family member on business and was living as a homeless vanaprastha, forced to take shelter of Krishna. His plans were uncertain, but his desire was strong and his health good. So he moved on to Mathura, carrying him with him the deity of Lord Chaitanya. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone. I don't know, sometimes there was a network that was showing not stable connectivity or poor quality. I don't know how was it to follow.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yeah, Prabhuji, in between, it was dropping, but because the screen was shared, so we can also read, but not for very long time. For some
So
point.
you were able to follow?
Yes, yes. But yes, it was multiple times. I could experience that for 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah, it is very nice chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. How everything appears to be happening, and
Yes, still.
the whole 360 turn. Yeah, complete circle.
Yes,
Yeah, where
thank
it
you.
started, yeah, ended there. Yeah. One thing that was nice to read about the United Nations. Yeah, currently we know what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, and yeah, the role of United Nations was not fulfilled, right? So the war shouldn't have happened if UN was on the principles of what Prabhupada said, because it's not the case. That's why we see still there is a lot of violence all over. That United Nations, because it is a atheistic ideology to maintain peace, yeah, it doesn't happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share anything? Okay. If not, then yeah, wish you a nice weekend. Thank you very much for joining. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय. His Holiness Sattva Swarup Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.